Okay, I think we can go because we are at noon. So good morning to everyone and welcome to this second panel discussion of the day-long seminar. And what we are going to be talking about at this panel discussion is really a very, very critical thing. And I say critical because, news at the end of the day is also an economic enterprise. And like all economic enterprises, it needs to be viable if it has to survive. But the kind of economics that the news business today is facing, the kind of constraints and pressures, and that's what our subject is: media and funding, economics, constraints and pressures. That's the formal definition of the subject we'll be discussing. But the kind of pressures, the kind of constraints that news media in particular is today facing, and I don't want to be sensational, I don't want to exaggerate, but it is literally facing an existential threat. It is very often fighting for survival, and I'll sort of give you a little context of how and why. There are so many choke points that have now emerged around the news business, news media, and some of these choke points are this new digital environment we are living in, where audiences have been fractured, almost irretrievably fractured. You have social media platforms, you have algorithms dictating what kind of news gets distributed to whom, you have distribution monopolies, you have fake news, which is, I mean, it's an oxymoron, but the fact is that it's now become acquired an identity of its own. And it's a very large enterprise, and it competes with mainstream credible legacy news. You have this amazing fracturing of audiences, which has a direct impact on revenue and profitability and viability. And then you have, in some of the constraints and pressures, you also have regulations which are tightening, almost in a discriminatory manner tightening. You have situations where news outfits don't get licenses. You have situations where news outfits' investment plans are not approved, or their investment approvals don't come through, and that again is a sort of a stranglehold that operates on the business. Then you have the use of certain laws, taxation laws, money laundering laws, UAPA. All of this requires an extremely expensive and draining legal battle, legal defense. All of this has an economic impact because ultimately resources are finite. It also has a chilling effect, and it has an effect on people's resolve to fight, people's ability to fight. So there are all these things that we are seeing, which sort of, as I said, are almost posing an existential threat to the news business. Today, on this panel, I've got with me two extremely accomplished news professionals. And of course, I'll start with a brief background and introduction to T.N. Ninan. It doesn't really need an introduction. He's considered to be a pioneering editor and trendsetter in Indian business journalism. Over a career spanning 5 decades, Ninan was the editor of Business Standard from 1993 to 2009, and from 1996 to 2009, its publisher as well. He was the chairman of the company's board of directors from 2009 till 2020. Earlier, Ninan was the editor of the Economic Times, and in the 1980s, the executive editor at India Today. He writes a very widely read opinion column, my favorite, essentially. I read that regularly every week. It's called Weekend Ruminations. It's in Business Standard. The column is translated and published in different vernacular publications. His book, The Turn of the Tortoise, in 2015, it offered a very critical assessment of India's economic prospects. He's also been a television commentator on economic and business issues. He's also the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Independent and Public-Spirited Media Foundation, the largest charitable funder of independent news websites. He's an independent director of the Press Trust of India. He is a past president of the Editors Guild of India. Of course, he's a recipient of several professional awards. And joining Ninan on this critical panel discussion is Praveen Someshwar. Praveen is the managing director and chief executive officer of the Hindustan Times Media Group. He's now been with the group for over 2 years and has been working towards transforming it into a new age media group with digital transformation and innovation being the driving forces. Prior to joining HT Media, Praveen was senior vice president and general manager with PepsiCo and responsible for all the company's businesses across North and Southeast Asia. Preceding that, he was the CEO for the food business, CEO for PepsiCo's beverage business in India and South Asia, CFO for PepsiCo's India and South Asia business, strategic and financial planning head for PepsiCo India and South Asia. Praveen is a chartered accountant and cost accountant by qualification, and he holds a bachelor's degree in business. So we are ready to go. Ninan, I will hand over the floor to you for your remarks and your comments.
Thank you, Raghav, and morning, everyone, and hi to Praveen. Media and funding. Let me begin by saying there is no one media. You have television, you have radio, you have print, you have websites, you have social media, and they all have funding challenges, but they have different dynamics in confronting those challenges. Even within print, newspapers and magazines have different issues to deal with. And within the digital world, what kind of website you are, broad spectrum or niche, metro or in the media dark hinterland, all of these change the funding dynamics for media entities. That being said, it is common knowledge that virtually across the board, the media now faces financial challenges that were not there before. And some of it has to do with the fallout of COVID. But really, the issues predate COVID. They relate to technological changes and new competition from completely new areas like the big tech companies. And, you know, the media are mostly small and medium enterprises. And they're completely out of their league when confronted by the likes of Amazon and Meta and Geo, for that matter. So there is a fundamental change of dynamic, and there are completely new sets of issues that the media are now confronted with. Having said that, I believe that the root of the problem is that the media in all forms expected advertisers to bring in the money. English language newspapers in particular consciously underpriced their product as business strategy and had as little as 10% of their revenue coming from readers, 90% came from advertisers. That may have been smart thinking at one point in time, but its business logic has been shattered as the advertising has now gone elsewhere. It's gone to IPL or to Kabaddi, or what are now known as the platform businesses like Twitter, which were not even media in any traditional sense. And in television, the entertainment channels have completely swamped the news channels. So expecting advertisers to keep coming in and paying for what you do without charging readers for what they're buying has turned out to be a completely wrong strategy. And that therefore undoes a lot of the strategy of growth that was there for the last 3 decades, I would say. Because the free to air, the free to view, and the virtually free to buy, all of that is now under challenge. Readers, viewers, and visitors are now being asked to pay. That usually means that when you start charging them, you lose readers and visitors. There is no choice. So we have now paywalls, newspapers have become more expensive, and you also have businesses that completely eschew advertising, like the streaming channels. The media is confronted with a question it had forgotten to ask. If you're going to charge readers for what it costs to produce what you serve out, how much of what you produce is actually something that your target reader is willing to pay for? And this therefore comes back to the fundamental question, which is a bit odd when journalists are losing their jobs or being asked to take pay cuts in a very difficult financial situation. But the fact is that if the reader is back in focus and readers are being asked to pay more, content is king again, in a way that it was not before. To get a reader to pay, you have to offer something of real value, possibly something unique, and certainly something that's good journalism. But content is king in shrunken media empires that have lost up to half their circulation and perhaps as much of their overall revenue. So editorial budgets get hacked like all budgets, And the Indian Newspaper Society, INS, has said that newspapers lost as much as 41% of their ad revenue in the year 2021. So how do you offer valuable content when downsizing is the name of the game, and has been so for the past 2 years and more? If we have the accounts publicly available for listed companies, even for some unlisted companies, and we can see that even the largest media entities are now losing money. They were making large profits before, and then now they have massive losses. Listed companies have seen their share prices crash. This is a real problem. One reason I think, and I mentioned this briefly before, is that the media is now swamped by larger players. So how does a newspaper company in, say, Kerala negotiate revenue sharing agreements with Google or Amazon? Or do you simply have to take what they're willing to give you? The Murdochs and the Disneys, who've crossed into geographical boundaries, have enjoy a level playing field and command the big advertising bucks. But what does a small newspaper do when the big players are suddenly the new guys in town? Business Standard's media columnist Vanita Kondikandekar totted up recently a list of the largest media companies today and 10 years ago. Moving down from the top, the list of the top 10 back in 2012 read as follows: The Times Group, Zee, Star India, Bharti Airtel, Sony, HT Media, Network 18, the Sun Network, Tata Sky, and the Naik Group, or DB Corp. As you can see, much of this list was recognizably traditional media. Then Vanita listed the top 10 today, and it reads like this: Meta, Sony Zee, Disney Star, Google India, Times Group, Jio Infocom, Tata Sky, Airtel TV, Sun Network, and DB Corp. Only 2 traditional newspaper companies, both of which have diversified, are in the list. The rest are conglomerates, either telecom, media entities, or tech giants, or global players who bought up Indian media entities, or a platform business like Tata Sky, which is now Tata Play. So the point is obvious: content may be king, but where is the kingdom? But if this is a David-Goliath battle, where the traditional small and medium media entities are up against the new tech Goliaths of the world and the conglomerates, you have an emerging scenario of steadily more concentrated power in a few hands. And this has begun to, governments and societies have started waking up to the problem. Even as companies like Twitter and Meta stand increasingly exposed to public scrutiny for their role in either allowing hate speech or indulging in partisan censorship, and in kowtowing to media-unfriendly governments like the one in Beijing or others closer home. It is early days in this battle, but already governments in places like Australia, France, and Spain have passed laws to force the big tech and platform companies to part with a bigger share of the pie to the actual content creators, which are the traditional media entities. The US Congress has before it a bill called the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act to help the struggling news industry. Before that, a news media bargaining code had taken effect, under which Meta and Alphabet have signed deals compensating news media for generating clicks and advertising dollars. The European Union has also moved down a similar road with its Digital Markets Act that could rein in the online gatekeepers. So governments have started stepping in to try and redress the balance between the old small media companies and the new tech giants, who are suddenly into media spaces because of advertising. Here in India, the Indian Newspaper Society, Digipub, and others have moved the Competition Commission against Google for abuse of dominance in news aggregation. And the government has said that it is considering a law to make big tech pay more for media content. But we need to be aware that this is a double-edged sword. Where would media companies, or journalists for that matter, be without Alphabet? whose Google platform enables a search for suitable content and therefore visitor access and traffic generation. The ad money is being taken away by Google for sure, but take away Google and where does that leave much of the digital media? This is a two-way relationship. The question is one of finding the right balance in that relationship. And that right balance, I believe, is not possible if governments do not step in to correct the existing balance, which is heavily weighted in favor of the tech companies. So that's one item on the agenda. But I think we also need to bear in mind that one of the virtues of the news aggregators, including homegrown ones like NewsHunt, is that they allow smaller fish to swim in the same waters as sharks do. Websites with no marketing budgets can still hope to build traffic and get some revenue, and with luck, become financially independent. Meanwhile, even the biggest among the traditional media players have to learn new tricks, mostly to do with technology. The media is now essentially technology play, and what kind of technology you harness, how you use it, how journalists get to comfortable with using more technology, all of that defines a lot of the media play, and people have to change, companies have to change, systems have to change. So there is an internal transformation within news organizations that is also required. I come now to something that the previous panel called the corporatization of media. Now, the media has always been corporate, except for a handful of trusts or cooperatives. The media has always been corporate. Indian media, through the last 75 years, was owned by big business, largely. There was a phase when the link between large businesses, groups with large businesses, and which also own media companies, that link broke for a variety of reasons. I think the fundamental reason is that media ownership does not sit well with a large business group because there are conflicts of interest. And so inevitably, if there is pressure from the government on a large business house, then they tend to get the newspaper to cave in or play ball. So when somebody like, so what I call this financial but non-commercial funding of the media. It is money that is put in, but it's not money put in with a commercial objective of getting a return. So when Jeff Bezos buys the Washington Post, what is his real reason? When Elon Musk buys Twitter, what is his reason? Or when Gautam Adani tries to acquire NDTV, what is his reason? It could be ego, plain and simple. It could be that some businessmen really value free speech and they want to try and protect that by investing in media and making it independent. Or it could be that they see this as a useful tool which will help them in their larger businesses. And it gives them influence with the government. So you have to be careful about who's paying the piper in this entire business media relationship. There is no one model. There are several things that happen at the same time. In a competitive marketplace, we have to see who turns out to have done well. So my final point is about non-financial, non-commercial funding of media. A lot of new media entities have gone into crowdsource funding, where people are willing to make small contributions, either one time or in a regular stream, to help media entities that they favor or which they think are good for the system. This is, of course, an interesting and important way of funding media that would not otherwise be viable. But we have to be careful again, because in a polarized political environment, this could create more partisan media, because if you are heavily bought into one political ideology, you fund media who buy into that ideology. And if you're bought into some other ideology, you support those. So you get echo chambers and you get a more sharply polarized media, which otherwise ideally should be belonging somewhere in the middle space. And we have examples of that in India, especially, but not only in broadcast television. Final form of non-commercial funding is, of course, charitable money. I happen to have the privilege of chairing the board of trustees of, as Raghav, you mentioned, on the Independent and Public Spirited Media Foundation, which had some generous donors create a substantial corpus. We've funded some 50 independent media websites in the last 6-7 years. And I can tell you that increasingly what we find is people, both young and middle-aged, who are willing to give up secure or semi-secure jobs to try and set up something of their own, to try and make a difference, not just in the big cities, but also in small towns across UP, Bihar, where they do highly localized content that makes a difference to local administrations. Now, these are not the mainstream big media entities that we have, but I believe that these do make a difference at the margin. They do influence what the mainstream media covers, because sometimes they do have the ability to set the agenda for what should be written or sold. And I think, therefore, it affects the public discourse nationally, regionally, as well as locally. And that is certainly enough for governments to sit up and take notice. So this is an interesting new element on the media scene, which is not there before. So I don't know how much time I've taken, but let me conclude with 5 broad observations. First, the advertising-driven media model is under challenge, and that is just as well because advertisers had begun to dictate content. We've heard enough about paid news. We've heard enough about equity deals and so on. So it is probably just as well that this dominant idea of the last 3 decades is now dead. Second, and as a corollary to the first, content is in a way king again, though in some cases they're only chota rajas in a shrinking principality, as media sheds readers and advertising revenue. Third, technology and what it can do for you is the essential game to master. Journalists who are not comfortable with technology and with adapting to changing technology will simply have a difficult time. So will media companies that do not broaden their range of expertise to include technology as an essential play. Fourth, more governments have to act in the David-Goliath battle between news creators and big tech platforms. And last, non-commercial funding can be both good and bad, depending on what kind it is. And we have to be careful what we wish for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ninan. That was, of course, a very comprehensive look at how media gets funded. I just wanted to pick on one point that you made before going to Praveen, so that get a little bit more amplification for myself and the audience. Perhaps one of the core points that you made is that the advertising-led model, which ruled for about 3 decades, is now broken, and in a sense, you believe that that's good for the business, because you're going to rely much more on content, which will get consumers to pay for how good that content is. One question on that, what we are seeing globally is that very powerful legacy brands, the New York Times or The Economist, they are able to get significant amounts of subscription revenue. And they are able to therefore build this alternate revenue line for themselves. And on the other side, very deeply vertical, virtually trade kind of websites are able to get subscription revenue. But the large middle, which generates the bulk of the content, is not able to do that, because the viewer or the reader is able to move seamlessly in between all this large group of the middle. So in a sense, if advertising shrinks and they're not able to get subscription revenue, the large middle is a bit threatened.
Raghav, I think one of the problems is that we have too much media. We have very crowded marketplaces for media. Think of the number of news television channels we have in this country. Of course, we have multiple languages, but think of the number and ask yourself, which country has so many? Look at the number of newspaper titles around. There are 4 mainstream business newspapers. Most countries barely have one. This is simply a very crowded market. And when there is churn in the market, you're going to get winners and you're going to get losers. And the guys who master the game will win, and those who don't will shrink. I mean, they rarely die, but they shrink. And they can be viable if they shrunk. If you get your act together in terms of matching revenue and expenditure, you may be a smaller player, but you're a viable player. You can live to fight another day. So that's possible. But at the end of the day, I think we simply have too much media fighting for the same reader's attention. This phenomenon of people buying 6, 8 newspapers in this country, or 3 and 4. That's most unusual around the world. You don't get anywhere else where people buy this many number of newspapers. Why? Because it was $2. You could buy 5 newspapers for 10 rupees. It wasn't a cup of tea. That has changed. Now newspapers are charging 10, 15 rupees, and maybe tomorrow they'll charge 20, 30 rupees. But then your content really has to be good. You need good journalists. You need to buy the best journalists. So this is the problem, that how do you, in a shrinking market, because advertising is gone somewhere else, how do you offer content that the reader is willing to pay? And that really puts journalism in the front and center of the whole business. In a way, that is a good thing.
And yeah, okay. And if some shrink out of business, that, as you said, may be a good thing, because you can shrink back to viability. You can even shrink back to non-existence, which is fine as well, because the laws of the market have to operate. Praveen, over to you for your segment.
First, good afternoon, and thanks, Raghav. It's a privilege to be part of this platform. Raghav, I've listened to you while growing up, if I may say so. And Mr. Ninan just told me, he said Ninan is the way to address him. But, he's one of the finest business journalists I've ever met and read. So privileged to be here. I think, I'm going to give it a little different slant than Ninan gave. Okay, he's pretty much spoken the length and breadth of media funding and the constraints and the challenges. But I'll try to address it, come at it a little differently, and what I think or we believe can be the way to, make the balance work. Independent news media is absolutely critical for any civilization nation over a period of time to prosper. And that has to be constant and ongoing. But today, the truth is media independent enough? And why is that so? And what are the challenges which it's facing for it to prosper? Now, all of this has accelerated post the pandemic, if I may say so. It was always there and in play, waiting for the bubble to unlock or bubble out. But it's really shown its head, if I may say so, after the pandemic. Now, digital, and therefore I call it new media, has seen significant landscape change over the last few years. It was always starting to being consumed, but now has dramatically changed. Now, to me, it's not only about delivering content. It is about how content is being consumed by tomorrow's readers. Okay, so one is about us, and I dare say, I wouldn't say fuddy-duddy us, but hey, we're still used to newsprint, we're still used to TV, we're still used to appointment viewing, appointment reading. And therefore, you can look at it in a certain way. But today's youth are not really consuming content by appointment anymore. They're consuming content by search and discovery. And that's it's a significant shift in how content is getting consumed. Now, if I were to look at news consumption, and if I dare say, if I guess what percentage of news consumption is done by appointment, which is by reading the newspaper, listening to the news, video, audio, any which way, or being consumed by search and discovery. I have to say, digital and therefore search and discovery is a bigger portion of that consumption. And that's the reality. That is a reality. Now, how does search work and how does discover work? If it is a substantial part of how our readers, our viewers are consuming. So I have, all of us talk about a manufacturing lens, and rightfully so. But let's look at it from a consumer lens on how they are consuming. They are consuming it predominantly through search and through discovery. Who leads search? Who leads discovery is the big question. What is the role of local news media publishers in any format to drive and influence that? And how do they monetize it is the big question to be answered. And I call all of that as new media. And if I were to say there are three large spaces how new media is getting consumed. One is digital platforms run by the big tech companies. Okay. All of our publisher content is available on that in some form or the other. Is it available completely? Or is it halfway there and the balance half is behind the paywall? That's a big debate, but it's available there. And therefore, how does that get consumed? That's a significant part of our consumption. The second is local news media publishers. All of us have our own platforms, have our own websites. Some of us have gone through this process of also looking at apps and investing in apps. But there, what are we doing? We are investing, as Ninan said very, very eloquently, that you need to invest in tech. You need to invest, like all of us certainly do, and that's our strength, in the right type of diversified content, if I may say so. But more importantly, in a manner that you get pulled out from search and discovery algorithms, of which you're second-guessing someone's way of working. That's the second big area, way it gets consumed. The third is news aggregators. Ninan spoke about News Hunt. I think there is Daily Hunt, there's InShots. All of these guys have syndicated news from all of us. In their mind, they have syndicated, in most cases, free syndication. In some cases, they pay for the syndication. They have invested in tech. They have hugely invested in customer acquisition. They spent some serious dollars on customer acquisition. Now, who do you think is funding that customer acquisition? That customer acquisition is being funded by VCs, like they fund various other businesses in terms of customer acquisition and are looking at what is the return on that customer acquisition. But the one thing I want to bring out in these news aggregators is, as we more and more start seeing that play out, is what they've done is they've invested significantly ahead of the local news media's publishers in terms of tech, in the form of tech in terms of backend, tech in terms of front end, tech in terms of app, tech in terms of personalization, and now tech in terms of AI-driven articles. I know all of you have been, over the last 10, 15 days, fortnight, have been listening to a lot on openai.com or ChatGPT as it's known as. And you know what? I know some of these aggregators are now starting to put some articles together through that AI-driven model, and they are testing for accuracy. Now, this will help them pretty much scale up significantly without investing in terms of sheer high-quality journalism. So 3 clear platforms where how news media is getting driven, if I were to summarize that part. One is on the big tech platforms, Second is local news media publishers putting out their content on their own websites and trying to drive direct consumption, but also getting traffic from the big tech. And third is aggregators. Now, if that is the discovery and that is the way it is getting consumed, the big question is, how do you monetize it? And so the best way to say it is that discovery in search mode is best monetized through advertising. So I heard Raghav talk about New York Times, the global legacy platforms. Even they rely on 50% advertising, actually 60% advertising and 40% subscription. And why is that so? Because that's a critical part of it. And that pie, the subscription pie has grown for them in the last 15 years, if I may say so, but it's starting to shrink because consumption patterns are changing. And advertising is starting to play an important enough role. So the truth is, I believe, as we go forward, advertising will certainly play an important role because consumption is happening in a certain format. Now, can we go and change the way consumption is happening? That's going to be exciting. That's an exciting challenge for all of us. Very exciting challenge for all of us. Not going to be easy because consumption patterns are driven by various other cultural drivers, but it is not impossible. That's one part of it. The second part of it is, if that is the way consumption grows over the next, say, decade, then we better know how to go and monetize it as local news media publishers. And therefore, advertising is a big part of it. Being driven on search is a big part of it because you get your traffic because you rank on search, because you rank on discovery, which are different algorithms at play. And therefore, how do you start working on that while the cornerstone of our success is investing in high quality content? That's hygiene. That, you cannot say that, will I invest in content or not? I have no choice because that's what I am good at. And that's what consumers who come onto our platforms want to consume. So I better get that. That's table stakes. And then we need to keep improving the quality of content. But that's table stakes to my mind. The key is, how do I get searched? And how do I monetize once I get searched? Now, all of us know today, if significant part of our revenues are advertising, and that is the truth, and if that is the trend we are seeing, ad revenues are cyclical. There's no doubt about it. Ad revenues today on our platforms are controlled by big tech. You like it or don't like it, more than 90% of the ad revenues on our platforms are now controlled by big tech. Now, big tech, as I see it, are media companies when it comes to revenue. There is no difference than us versus others because consumers come and consume content on that platform. How are they different? They are media companies, but they are intermediaries when it comes to regulation, governance, and costs. And when you have such power, with having the accountability of what you need to do, comes the imbalance. The imbalance of power between big tech and local news media publishers. That's really what it is. Now, does big tech need each of us? Does it need Hindustan Times? Does it need Business Standard? Does it need Times of India? I don't think they need any one of us individually. Does it need the collective of news journalism? Yes, they do. That's their bread and butter. It's now, I think enough data has demonstrated more than, significant part of the search. I've heard from 65 to 90% part of this percentage of the search being driven by news on these big tech platforms. If that is so, then obviously news is their cornerstone of consumption on their platforms. And therefore, as a collective, news is absolutely critical. But they're not dependent on any one news publisher. However, now look at it from a publisher's point of view. We realize that search and discovery is driven by big tech. 90% of the traffic which comes in is driven by that big tech. And therefore, each of we publishers are dependent on big tech for traffic. Look at that imbalance of power. Okay, one person doesn't need any have any commitment to any of the core issues of regulation, governance, and costs around public interest journalism, if I may say so. The other person very clearly is dependent on that big tech platform to get traffic in, and is responsible for all regulations, governance, and public journalism investments. And that is the imbalance. It's a market failure, if I may say so. There is no doubt about it. It is a failure of markets. Some of the countries across the world have attempted to find their own balance. And I think this balance can only come if legislation comes into play. There is no other way. Everybody will tell you that publishers need to come together to unlock this logjam. Yes, they do need to. I think, yes, they do need to invest in great quality content. In my mind, that's hygiene. There is no walking away from that. Yes, they need to work together to solve this issue. But it's not going to get solved because the balance is so tilted towards the favor of big tech that anytime you sit for a discussion, that's not going to make sense. Therefore, legislation is absolutely critical. Now, this has clearly had a damaging effect, if I may say so, on media, on journalism, and therefore society at large. The longer we take to get this balance right, the more pain we will see it impacting the society in many ways. And therefore, it's absolutely critical to get this balance right if we need to look into the future. Now, within that, and I'm still at advertising, therefore, within that, I see it, there are two imperatives to unlock that. Given that advertising is going to be a significant part of all of our revenues, there are two imperatives. Imperative number one, in my mind, is reimagine search. We got to reimagine search. Because if we don't make search a little more transparent, this is not going to work for the benefit of society in the long term. The fake media, fake news, all of that is partly because there isn't enough transparency of search. And to my mind, I think reimagining search is absolutely critical. Now, there are many ways to do it. I'm not going to say this is the way, but all of us need to sit together and brainstorm what is the most ideal way of reimagining search. Not something most governments across the world have attempted to do. They have kept quiet about it. We are seeing a lot of discussion around it. There is a lot of insistence around building a little more transparency around these algorithms. But look at it from a big tech point of view. Their point of view is this is their secret sauce to their business. And therefore, making it transparent in some way is pulling them down. I think the tech is the big secret sauce to their business on how to make that work. I do not believe the filters are the secret sauce. So I believe a little differently there. And therefore, while we respect the sauce, the secret sauce which drives their business, I think we should separate the filters which decide the algorithm versus the technology which drives the algorithm. I think the technology which drives the algorithm is absolutely important for them. So that number one is reimagine search. Second is, balance financial earnings between big tech and local media publishing houses. Imperative, I think most, and Raghav said it in his introduction, Ninan said it differently, that most companies, okay, it doesn't matter whether they are backed by large business houses or otherwise, are today bleeding. They're bleeding on revenue, bleeding on profitability, while they need to continue to invest in building high quality journalism. They are bleeding. And why are they bleeding? It's not that the model is broken. It is not to say that there is not enough revenue being generated with consumption of news. I think it is being generated. There is adequate revenue being generated with consumption of news. It is not being shared appropriately. Where the investment is being made, there is no share. Where the investment is not being made, and it is at the front end, there is huge money being made. And therefore, they are very profitable businesses. So it's the lopsided balance, which is, and the only way you will balance this out, in my mind, is through legislation. There is no other way. Today, and somebody spoke about it, I think Ninan spoke about it on, the static of looking back and seeing what are the next set of actions which each of these publishing houses are, taking to reinstate profitability in their models. Separation, deductions of salary, cutting corners on something else. But all of those are not going to really significantly change the model. The model is generating enough revenue. The model is very profitable. It is the balance which is missing. And we need to correct that. If we do not correct that, we will continue to see these challenges. Now, everybody talks about Australia. Now people will talk about Canada as they're going forward. People just spoke about New Zealand. But look at Australia as an example. Within a few years, when the Competition Commission, when people landed at the commission, what did they say? They said, here's the imbalance of power. They said, there is an imbalance of power. Let's get the balance right. It's monopolistic in its behavior. We need to correct for it. All media houses came together. They were able to influence the government to say the importance of high quality journalism, which is profitable enough in the long run, so that society can prosper. All of them came together. And within a few years, what happened? One part of it, if I may say so, saw progress. And that part of it is building more balance in terms of financial earnings. They created a news media and digital news media bargaining code, if I may say so, which basically got news media and the digital platforms to mandatorily bargain and agree on what is the share. Difficult step, but a big step to making high quality journalism real, sustainable, and therefore many, many, many more years to come. That's one step to it. Now, what did they do? At the end of it, I'm told somewhere between $200 to $250 million were given back to the news media publishers. That's roughly $10 per every person in Australia. 25 million is Australia's population, $250 million were paid back to news media publishers. Nobody was doing gratis. Obviously, big tech was making those dollars to go and give that rollouts. And if that share, if you convert that $10 into purchasing power, PPP on a McBurger basis for India, that could be anywhere between $2 to $3. You're looking at $2.5 to $3 billion to be paid out. And we all know big tech makes those monies here. It is absolutely real. And therefore, the question is, should we create a more balanced share instead of the small pennies being thrown out to local news media publishers and therefore impacting, in my mind, public interest journalism? That, I think, is a critical issue. And that's about advertising, if I may say so. The second bit is about, it's a subscription, which is what Ninan said. Content is king, and I think absolutely agree with that. And when content is king, how do you make sure that people subscribe to it? Okay, that's a journey, even in the US, where people are ready to pay for much higher order subscriptions. My belief is 40% of the revenue comes through subscriptions, nothing more than that. And that too, that's amongst the top 2 or 3 players. As we go down, it's significantly lower. I think we need to consistently build out the subscription model, but it's going to be a slow journey in India. I know of lots of publishers who have attempted, continue to attempt. Each one of us are doing it in our own manner. And I think every year is a little better than the previous year, if I may say so. We're seeing pricing go up. We are seeing digital subscription come here. But it's really a drop in the ocean, if I may say so, in the overall algorithm. But it's an important drop, and I think we need to continue to build up. So I have no doubts, no disagreement when Ninan says that subscription is absolutely imperative to build. In any format, be it newsprint, be it TV, be it audio, be it digital, I think we need to continuously build subscription. But that's not, in my mind, the only silver bullet which will solve the issue. Okay, so that's the second thing. The third, I think Ninan very eloquently talked about it on, how do you build, patronage or donations so that we can build out great quality journalism. I think that's real. There is no doubt about it. I think we need to consistently build out those models. It is a model of the future. You'll see more and more publishing organizations, but I don't think that is the only way to solve it. So if I were to summarize, I think consumption behaviors have changed. And to me, that is an important part of this discussion. Consumption is through search and discovery. Search today, discovery is growing rapidly. I know now discovery is now starting to get to 35% of the overall consumption on digital platforms. So search and discovery is the way consumption is happening. And therefore, to be relevant in that form of consumption, advertising is a big solve. Subscription is a smaller solve. Now, to be relevant in that type of consumption, we need to invest in tech. We need to be on top of tech, to personalize, to provide platforms, to provide user interfaces of the future. Each of these are absolutely critical. So tech is important, but I think government legislation is critical for this imbalance to be balanced. If we were not to balance this imbalance, we will, even in the near future or the distant future, talk about this as a challenge. Thanks, Raghav. That's my piece.
Thanks, Praveen. Thank you very much. Coming from the commercial tech consumption perspective, I think you put a lot of serious thought on the table. If I was to look at Ninan's arguments, and if I was to look at Praveen's argument, there's a very thick congruence here on one issue. Praveen spent a lot of time on it. Ninan's also spent a lot of time on it. And that is, how do you regulate or legislate a fairer sharing of revenue between the tech platforms who are today getting 80-90%, sometimes even more than that, and the actual person who's investing in the content? And unless you do that, what Praveen called imbalance, what Ninan called that the negotiating power, Ninan actually said, how does a small publisher even talk to a Google? So it's really that imbalance which needs to be corrected. And I think both agreed that it has to be through legislation, regulation, lawmaking, government intervention. Now, I put two issues here to you, both of you, on this, which, as I said, was a big argument that you both share. One, we haven't seen the Indian government being too keen to do anything around this. There have been some talk, stray talk, especially when someone raises an issue of it's happening in Australia, it's happening in Canada, it's happening in New Zealand. So the Indian government also says, yes, it's an issue we should look at. But we don't seem to see any decisive move towards bringing in a law, bringing in a regulation, which could balance this out. So that's point number one. And I'll come to point number two when I hear your thoughts, because it is widely thought, and I'm not talking only of the union government, central government, I'm talking of even state governments. It's widely thought that in India, governments are so adversarial with the media, news media in particular, that they may actually not be too unhappy if it ends up weakening, if this imbalance ends up weakening the news media. And therefore, we don't seem to see this very decisive intervention from the government. Ninan, your thoughts?
It's an important point, Raghav. We know where the government's, which way the government is leaning. They're in bed with some of the big tech companies, and that's not a secret. And they are fundamentally not friendly to the news media. So I'm not a great optimist, although ministers have spoken about the need for a law. Frankly, I would blame the news industry for not getting together on a common platform and making an issue of this together. There are forums where it can be done. A combined force of all the news media companies is something that no government can entirely ignore, and it's really up to the big media players to take the lead. I must tell you that some years ago, when this issue first surfaced, Germany's largest media company had actually sent a representative here whom I'd met earlier in Berlin to try and, because they were getting people to get together in other countries, and they came here trying to get Indian media companies to get together to fight the big tech companies on the revenue share. And we did have a meeting, because I roped in quite a few media company representatives and CEOs into a meeting, but it didn't get anywhere. So if we'd got our act together 5-7 years ago, we would have been in a better position today. But it's not too late. We should do it now. And instead of simply waiting for the government to act, get together as a lobby group and talk.
And go for it. Praveen, your thoughts on, because the government doesn't seem to be giving any evidence of wanting to help you out. So how do you get help?
So look, Raghav, I pretty much, I hear what Ninan is saying, and I agree to most of what he said, but I'm a little bit of an optimist in spite of everything. Okay, that's the only add I would say. And my think on optimism is, I think we media publishers need to understand that to move the government, you need to first communicate very, very clearly why you believe there is an imbalance. Because the moment they understand where the imbalance is and why the imbalance and what is the monopolistic nature of the imbalance, okay, I think the Competition Commission will move ahead. They may not move exactly the way you want them to move, but I believe they will take the right steps. So we need to, do it. So in Australia, it didn't happen easily. Okay. Even I think across the world, people are cynical about media publishers. I used to be with PepsiCo 20 years, and I had a point of view. I'm on the other side of the whole equilibrium now, if I may say so. I had a point of view. Okay. I think we need to invest time, resources, each one of us, explaining where the balance is and why the imbalance, and get the CCI to move. Okay. And put a pressure around our properties to the right people. People of India will move because they realize the importance of good quality journalism. Okay. So I believe that's a journey, and we haven't. So Ninan is absolutely right. We didn't embark 6, 7, 8 years back, but I think we are just taking some baby steps. We need to move a lot more rapidly if we need to see change.
Yes, if you need to see change in time, because the rapid weakening that is happening on the other side is also creating a point that Ninan touched, and I don't want to spend too much time on it because there are a lot of questions here on that. And when I come to the questions, we'll address those issues. Is how the, for the lack of any other better word, the oligarchs are taking over the media. I mean, it's a possibly a dramatic way of saying it, but you are seeing that, and that oligarchization of Indian media feeds on the weakness. But I want to just raise the second point that I talked about, Ninan, and that is, when there was a brief period in which Google started talking to Indian publishers about sharing revenue. I think when they came under pressure in Australia, when they came under pressure in some other parts of the world, they suo moto on their own thought that they would have this conversation with Indian publishers. But then we saw a very curious trend. And that's the underbelly of what I'm going to say. We saw the big publishers being able to strike deals with Google, but we saw the small publisher being elbowed out. So on the one side, you have the adversarial government stand. And then when you actually had a conversation, the big publishers virtually got the biggest pie, and the small publishers did not have any voice. In fact, were not even able to speak to Google to get any revenue share. So there is divide, there is a fracturing within as well, which again doesn't lend itself to creating a plural, strong, broad media.
Well, if you don't stand together, you fall. It's an old game of divide and rule. And if the big media players think that they can do it on their own, at some point they realize they're not strong enough.
I hope, yes. Well, I'm with you. Again, it's an optimistic call. Praveen, your thought, because the big publishers did manage to speak to Google, and I'm sure you're one of them. But the smaller ones were not able to.
Well, I'm not going to say whether we managed to speak or not, but we did manage to speak. And, I think we should constantly speak because communication is critical if you believe we want to solve any challenge.
But
I just say the side deals are small pennies. Okay. Yeah. I don't think that has changed anything. I don't think that has changed any view of anyone, if I may say so. The way I look at it is a little differently. And I'm just going to, Raghav, I'm just going to give a different slant, but I think you want to make a point. So please make the point so that I can tell you my other slant.
No, I was just going to amplify what you said, that the conversations happened, but very, very small pennies dropped. And that points back to what Ninan said, that if you're not going to go together, if the 5-7 big guys are going to say, listen, I got my deal, and now you 200 can, go look after yourself. It ended up being small pennies. That's the point.
But that's the different slant I want to give. I don't think it is about only publishers making a difference on this one. What we need to impress is the monopolistic behavior. And this behavior is not only about sharing of monies, it is the monopolistic behavior of how search and discovery works. That's the future of consumption. And that is an important part as much as the money's balance part. I believe the future of consumption is search and discovery. That is also monopolistic.
Absolutely.
They decide today morning that Raghav's platform needs to be taken care of. Tomorrow morning, Ninan's platform, day after, Times of India, the 5th day, Hindustan Times. I genuinely believe that is equally a big issue. Both the issues are equally challenging. Search, discovery, and the balance of financial metrics.
Agreed.
Now, I think when we talk monopolistic behavior, then it is not about these pennies. It is about that. And we need to move the CCI in that thinking.
Okay.
And I think we are there. We now need to build that conversation so that we can make big impact.
Right. So I'm going to now switch towards the latter part of our panel discussion to some of the questions which are coming in. Some of the questions, and I'll take them. I would please do answer them as briefly as you can so we can accommodate as many questions as possible. So this one says, when corporates buy up media, it is hard to recognize good intentions, such as an interest in protecting free speech. Does it not signify an attempt to apply opium on the media, to neutralize the media, to hide truth from public visibility, to control society and politics? So this is a strong question on the what I talked about, the oligarchization of Indian media. Ninan?
That is one scenario, Business Hand has been owned by a family that also owns or controls a bank. And my experience is that they never ever tried to exercise control of what the paper said.
So that could well be an exception, Ninan, which just proves the rule.
It's possible. My fundamental proposition is that big business does not sit well with media ownership. There will be conflicts of interest, and there will be therefore a price to pay. It can happen in different ways at different points of time. And it's an interesting fact that governments tend to put more pressure on proprietors than on editors. They leave the editors alone because they control them through the proprietors. So that's why I said it's a double-edged sword, this whole business. A lot of money coming in. Jeff Bezos wants to invest in, build the Washington Post and make it a global brand. Elon Musk is doing whatever he thinks he's doing. Nobody can understand it. But there is, these are guys with so much money, and the media is such a tiny part of what they do, that they can bankroll it till kingdom come without feeling the pinch. So technically, it could be good for media if it works well. But on the other hand, it could work very badly if they're trying to seek political control or, some other objective.
Yep, that's a given. There's a question, Praveen, here for you. This is really squarely about digital media. It says, has digital media made people, youth in particular, headline oriented? Is the consumer user satisfied with just headlines minus the analysis? It's a busy world, and is there not a challenge to attract youth in ways that prompts youth to know and reflect? This gets back to your consumption pattern.
I'm asked this question all the time, saying that I write great quality content not being consumed by these people. And my answer is very simple. We all work towards writing great quality content in a manner which these people consume. And you got to find different mediums and ways to reach them, unlock their minds, and get them to consistently consume. So I just believe there are opportunities there. We've seen some progress. We got to invest serious dollars to make that happen. That's how I would answer. Just on the previous question, before I'm always enthused when people talk about oligarchs and talk about big business houses buying up interests. But I think big tech media is the biggest oligarch going around. Okay, Ninan started by saying that, hey, we know the government is friendly with big tech. I think they are the biggest oligarchs we should be worried about. Before we get to, I think that is where power is getting monopolized, and if I may say so, not being used appropriately. And that's what we need to look at. Sorry.
That also links back to your point about making the algorithm, the technology behind the algorithm, far more transparent and far more non-discriminatory. I mean, transparency is one thing. It should be fundamentally built as a piece of software that is non-discriminatory, and there are ways of doing that.
They keep changing the algorithm periodically, and then suddenly you find dramatic changes in traffic.
Absolutely.
And there is no explanation as to why the algorithm was changed, and now you have to adapt to a new algorithm. I agree with Praveen's point that you need transparency in some of this.
Absolutely, it's frankly at the operating end, it's opaque as hell. That Sunday your traffic is such, and Monday morning it falls off a cliff by 40%, and then you ask why, and then you're told, Google changed an algorithm and posted some kind of an update somewhere, and then you're supposed to go and find that out. Okay, I'm going to. This one is a specific question. Maybe Ninan, this should actually be for you. It's specific, but let me raise it since a viewer has raised it. Why news media, particularly business newspapers, unwillingness, to address the nation's consistently high unemployment rate as a crisis that it is. So I guess the question is really, there's so much headline around the potential of the Indian economy, but some of the crises of the Indian economy, particularly unemployment, as this reader or viewer seems to want to know. Why is it that not given that much prominence?
You're asking me?
Yes, naturally to you.
Praveen has a business paper as well.
Yes.
No, I have a very clear answer from, I'm no longer in any way organizationally linked to Business Standard, I'm just a columnist. But if I can speak for the paper, I would say that the paper has consistently addressed the unemployment question. Constantly. We have a weekly column on employment trends. There is no other newspaper that has it, which tracks it all the time. We write about it, we comment on it, we track the government's employment numbers. There is no way that you can say that Business Standard is ignoring the employment issue.
No, I think, okay, I think the collateral to that question is that maybe there is a lot of focus on corporate news, stock markets. That's a collateral, because there's another question here.
To our readers, they're interested in investment.
But this specific to you, so let me ask this. The focus of the business newspaper so far has been mostly on companies specific, different kinds of businesses, quarterly results of the companies, expansion plans, etc. So again, it's the same question.
We're not Pravda, we're a business newspaper.
Yes, all right, understand. Let me ask this question, Praveen, to, well, this is not about the business that you lead, but this probably have to wear your the fact that you are sitting in a particular industry, the news industry, and not just your own business. And this is a democratic dialogue is not promoted in most of the media. That's a question. Even during TV debates, there is a clear agenda of manufacturing consent, as it happened in the case of the Fisher people struggle against the Vijay mother poll. So I think wear your hat as a watcher of the news business and tell us whether you see this kind of stuff happening, and therefore also cluttering up the credibility of news.
I started by saying independent news media is critical for any civilization or nation to prosper. Okay, part of that independence is manufactured consent. Okay, when people try to force consent, then they don't need to force it. Okay, a good dialogue is where you could leave it, and there are two sides to a dialogue. As we've discussed it, there is a manufacturing side, there is a consumer side, and there is an intermediary side. And how do you balance that out? I think debate has to be, there is always going to be two sides. There will never be a closure on debate. And if we start respecting that, a debate will be a lot healthier. But culturally, it's also a little bit about what society is seeking from such products. And if I may say so, if it's seen as a consumer product, society at times is starting to seek finality of debate. When it closes, have we been able to close and get to a certain view? And that they make it out as success. And if they do make that out as success, you will see, you'll be poorer in the debate because everybody is trying to manufacture concepts. So we just need to allow for debate to open up. I think it's also all of us to introspect as a society.
Yeah, so now we're coming close to the end of this session. So I would, it'd be good to hear closing summary remarks from both our speakers, because we've gone over the gamut of the debate, and 2 or 3 key issues have emerged. And the key issue is correct the imbalance between people who are today getting disproportionate amount of profit. And these are really the large tech platforms. That is the fundamental reform that's needed, but we are not seeing that much movement, at least from the government side. Although Praveen seems to have much more optimism about the Competition Commission acting on it. And the second, of course, is also the sort of algo terrorism that publishers have to contend with, because you don't really know what the algorithm is based on. These are the 2 major points that have come, but there were other points addressed as well. So I would request both the speakers to spend about 5 minutes each in summarizing their points of view, as well as new arguments they may have picked up during the course of this debate. Ninan, would you go first, please?
Raghav, I would say, number one, the world is what it is. The question is, how do you deal with it? What has happened in technology and what has happened in the corporate technology environment, all the changing ways in which people consume news or entertainment, the relative role of news within the larger media space, all of these are what you have to take as given. The question is, what do you do with it? And that, to me, focuses attention primarily on what the media companies have been doing so far and what they need to do. And the fact is that India's media companies, even when they could afford to, or those who could afford to, did not invest in the kind of journalism that they could have and should have. They focused primarily on the advertising revenue side of it. There was a publisher who said, I can bring out a newspaper without journalists. With those kinds of attitudes, you devalue the role of the editor, and you're paying the price today with losses of hundreds of crores. So you need to redress that imbalance and get back to focusing much more on journalism and asking the reader, what is this worth to you? And how much are you willing to pay? If you're willing to pay for a foreign publication with marginal relevance to India, an annual subscription of $20,000, why aren't you willing to pay $2,000 for an Indian newspaper? If you have a problem with the tech companies and the negotiating, relative lack of negotiating power, and the fact that they take the lion's share of the revenue based on your content, then why haven't you got your act together and got together? Why isn't there a group that's talking to government as a group for representing the entire industry and not one or two companies? So I think media have to introspect. At the end of the day, since this is the forum we have is the Editors Guild of India, at the end of the day, it's journalists who pay the price for the media companies' failures, in the same way that the infantry soldier pays the price for the general's mistakes. So looking at it from the average foot soldier in journalism, they're the guys who will create the content for you if you back them with budgets, training, and so on. And that's what you need to do to survive in the new game, even as you try and master the technology play, which is a challenge in itself. But I think a lot of questions that we focused inward. You have to take the world for what it is. You can't change that. So you do what you need to do.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. The onus is on the media companies themselves to correct this imbalance, to energetically at least begin engagement, and to put that energy behind getting that imbalance sorted out. Praveen, your concluding comments?
So first thing is, as I summarize, I'd have to say, you've got to invest in high quality journalism, which helps public interest. Absolutely key. There's no running away with it. But with that, I think you need to invest in high quality tech so that you are able to deliver this content to the future consumers. That's absolutely imperative. I think that's the role of media publishing organizations as we go in the future. You can't say you'll do one and not do the other. I think the time has come that both go hand in hand to ensure this content is consumed by our future consumers. That's my starting part. Okay, if I were to look at it, start from point zero, this is the key. Now, as we go on, now to make this model work, we need to fix the imbalance. We need to work towards correcting this imbalance. And to me, there are two imbalances as I keep talking about. One is about how do you deliver search and discovery. The other is the financial algorithm. So there is a tech algorithm and a financial algorithm. Both these algorithms have to be balanced in the short, medium, and long term if we need this model to fly and consistently deliver to consumer interests, to public interests. I think so. Therefore, to summary, You got to invest in journalism. You got to invest in tech. You need to correct for the balance, both in terms of tech algorithm and financial algorithm, so that model sustainably unlocks for the times to come.
Thank you, Praveen. If I could just add a couple of lines to what clearly has emerged as the most important, the most substantial points out of this discussion, that the news business, the news media, the key stakeholders in the news media business themselves, have to get united about protecting their own interests, because they are dealing at two ends of the spectrum with two very, very powerful groups of people. One is the government and the regulators. They have to get the government and the regulators to get moving on legislation which at least creates a more level sharing and a level playing field between the large tech companies and the content creators. And of course, they have to also then engage on the other side with these very powerful tech companies, because today the distribution game is being controlled by them, largely controlled by them. And they are also in the business of selling ads. So they are encroaching on your, encroaching in a sense on your ability to run your business by actually influencing two things which are very vital to your business. One is distribution, how your content gets distributed, and B, how do you monetize your content. So the news business itself has got to deal with these two very powerful entities. On the left, the government; on the right, the tech companies. And the owners, as both Ninan and Praveen have said, and Ninan more forcefully, and Praveen more forcefully on the tech side, is that unless you guys get your act together, you'll have to live in the world that you live in, and you can crib about it, but cribbing won't get you anywhere. You have to begin acting as a unified force. I think that's the core message that has come out of this very enlightening discussion. I once again thank Ninan and Praveen for giving so generously of their time and their thoughts. I thank the audience and the listeners who participated. I thank the people who asked questions. And I will leave this session with the reminder that at 2:15 p.m., we've got another very interesting session coming up. It's on trolling, intimidation, and fear of arrest. And the speakers at that session are going to be Rajdeep, Sardesai, and Sucheta, Dalal. And the moderator will be Vijay, Naik. So please do log in for that session at 2:15. Once again, thank you, Ninan. Thank you, Praveen. And thank you, our audience.
Thank you, Raghav. See you, Praveen. All the best.
Thank you. Thanks, Raghav. Ninan, great to meet you. We'll meet.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.